Thank you so much for your presentation. Maybe one of the instruments that we can use is the integration of efforts, not just of the Russian Federation, but also the Eurasian Economic Community countries. And right now, the next speaker is Professor Rojdestvinsky, the prospects of cooperation within the Eurasian Economic Commission. Dmitry Anatolovich is the head of the Department of Coordination of Activities in the field of drug circulation. Please, Dmitry, the floor is yours. Well, good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. It's a pleasure for me to speak at this conference. I hope that although our schedule is very jammed, you are not tired yet, and I'll try not to overburden you with my presentation. I'll try to make this presentation as simple as possible. When I was preparing for my speech, I thought about real world data, and an idea occurred to me that there is a need to reflect on existing problems. When I was trying to formulate these problems, I had my concern. Maybe I can see several problems, but these problems do not exist in reality. But as I listened to your presentations, it turned out that the speakers not just formulated these problems, but like the previous speaker, identified the problem which is important for me. That's the Tower of Babel problem. That means lack of interaction between stakeholders involved in a study, no data coding system, no data standardization system, as other speakers mentioned. Also, the results of the real world data obtained are not recognized. Well, another problem, and it was voiced by other speaker, that's the problem of fake drugs, as we call it, when the results of RWE, RWD are substituted by the results of drug sales. Many people say that if we sell a lot of drugs, well, if the drug is sold like hotcakes, that's nice. It's a good drug. Or my neighbor next door recommended I use this drug, but it doesn't mean this drug is good. And obviously, this may be a slur on the reputation and not just on the pharmaceutical market of one particular country, but several countries and the population as a whole. Recently, in the pharmaceutical Vestnik, I read the article saying that population here believes more different doctors speaking on TV than real physicians who administer treatment to them. And this is because of the results of real world data trials are replaced by other factors like the amount of sales of the drug and other factors. So that is why the population in Russia doesn't believe that the market exists, that the market is under control as far as a particular drug is concerned. The population doesn't believe in effective drugs. And finally, there is another problem, poor information of the healthcare community about specific drugs. And that is why real world data cannot be used to register drugs. And as it has been mentioned, Some clinical trials were stopped because many people think they should be like this step by step golden standard phase one, phase two, phase three. Sometimes when we're talking about anti cancer drugs, it's not so easy to do, as well as when we're talking about emergency medicine. What approaches can be used to solve this problem? If we analyze what the situation on the Eurasian Economic Union market is, I don't want to say that we offer ready solutions for RWD and RWE data, but we can use some approaches from the existing regulatory basis. If we look at the problem of lack of regulatory regulation in the Eurasian Union, we have already 10 documents regulating clinical trials at different phases, at different stages. Many of them can be applicable to real world data trials. For example, the good clinical practice standard in terms of standardizing the primary healthcare is quite applicable here. The rules of studying biologics, well, can be applicable to post marketing research on the basis of real world data. Also, the guidelines on common issues of clinical trials and the guidelines on the selection of doses of exploratory drugs are important for clinical trials because we can see whether the heterogeneous population that had the drug administered could be compared to similar groups to do such an analysis. So as you can see here, many of the documents adopted contain different paragraphs that can be useful to those who deal with the organization and conducting RWD and RWE trials. I would also say that an algorithm to choose the comparator drug is of paramount importance, and these provisions are in the documents of the Eurasian Economic Union. Here we have an algorithm what to do to compare a particular drug, what is applicable at the stage of development is applicable also to compare long-term consequences of the therapy. Again, you can use the results obtained and written into the documents of the Eurasian Economic Union. For example, we have the standard to assess bioanalogs, like whether this particular drug can achieve the same effect. Also, again, we can do the study at the pre-marketing stage and the assessment of interchangeability, which is also important in my view, and which should be based on real world data, but not on expert opinions made on the basis of composition of the drug or some other documents like the drug master file, especially when the clinical randomized clinical trials were conducted on a limited number of people. By the way, the previous speakers have already mentioned that the results obtained in the master file confirm the real world data, and that's also very important to assess the interchangeability of the therapy if the endpoint is to have a safe and effective drug, especially when we need to replace one drug with another one, and it may be a generic or an analog. Well, the problem of fake drugs, well, and I should say that we have already discussed this at the meetings of our Eurasian Economic Union. And another problem is simplification. You can see that during the last 4 years, we have prepared 10 guidelines on clinical trials. Not a single state on the national level can boast this amount of ground work done, but nevertheless, the concept of the study of the drug on the chronological principle used in the regulatory practice of the Russian Federation indirectly leads to the problem of fake drugs, like if the bomb Gold Star was used in the 1960s quite successfully, and people say no one had any complaints. Let's use the same bomb now after so many years. And we have the union regulatory documents. The fact that the drug is well studied means that there should be 5 criteria proven in real clinical practice. So it's not just a matter that the drug is on the market or has been on the market for that long, but also it should be proven that the drug has been in high demand, that the results of the treatment, not just as the result of sales, the sales outcome, but also how many people got this drug, what were the outcomes. So there should be some scientific results obtained in recent years as far as this particular drug is concerned. So once again, when we work with the section well studied drugs, means the use of real clinical practice, real world data to resolve this problem. Finally, there is the problem of poor information, like we make a comparison with the Russian guy called Mitrofan, who did not want to study, who did not want to be in the know, who did not want to learn. And of course, as for oncology, for example, there were not so many studies conducted in Russia. Many oncologists say that if we wanted to study the equivalence of generics, it's difficult to do it in today's conditions, but there are classical requirements for bioequivalency. Maybe we can use this standard and real world data when the study is conducted not on healthy individuals, but these anti-cancer drugs can be administered to patients who are at the terminal stage as, for example, compassionate treatment, and also there the problem of poor information of doctors regarding the real world data also includes compassionate trials, which are very widespread in the West when patients who suffer from incurable diseases are actively involved in the study. You can get real world data and thus determine potential candidate drugs, not drugs per se, but just the candidates, which later can be used for treating specific diseases if trials show that the drug is quite effective. So, this problem of poor information of doctors is a serious problem for us, and there are pre marketing trials that are sometimes conducted. They may be very complex, and of course, this may be an obstacle on the way of using this initiative in the healthcare system. Well, in conclusion, I would like to say that the Eurasian Economic Commission paid a lot of attention to the development of drug market, but that was in the past. Now we have the development strategy from 2020 to 2025 and up to 2030. There were proposals put forward to start the implementation of the concept 10.3 related to healthcare. And I should say that recently there was a meeting under the auspices of Minister Glaziev, and there were a lot of proposals regarding epidemiological studies and prevention issues, but unfortunately there was not a single proposal to introduce big data practice in real world data. Well, but I'd like to make a caveat. By the end of the year, the Commission will collect the proposals, and if they are targeted, we'll be able to develop our own drug circulation market, but also to do everything possible to lay the foundation for RWD, RWE studies, not just in Russia, but also in all 5 states of the Eurasian Economic Union. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to say. I was planning to give you an example showing the difference of RWD, RWE practice. And again, we have different instructions to use specific drugs, but I think you are experts here. You know that very well. That's all there is to it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dmitry, for this wonderful presentation. Well, as for today's conference, we got two proposals for the working group. We can prepare documents, and these documents, we have a good chance now, could help us really change the situation. There was a proposal from the State Duma representative, which is the legislative branch of the Russian Federation. Dmitry Anatolovich provided us the roadmap. If we accelerate this process, we can start changing the situation before the new year, at least identify the trend regarding where to go. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that the conference materials will be accessible. I didn't manage to listen to all presentations for some reasons, but what I've heard, that's the information I wouldn't like to lose. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. The recording is taking place, and it's done in 2 languages. We are broadcasting using Zoom and YouTube at the same time. You have a chance to listen to these presentations later if you missed something. Okay, our next presenter